Thank you for being here. I'm here for one reason and one reason only today, and that is to stand up for the children of Alabama. You know, in the last few weeks, we've heard a lot of comments concerning charter schools. You've heard my opponent, Archer Davis, say that we need to implement charter schools so that we can be a part of that $4 billion that President Obama has laid out for charter schools, our innovative schools. Then you've heard Governor Riley say that we need to pass laws in Alabama so that we can start implementing charter schools so that we can draw down a part of that $4 billion that President Obama has laid out. That's just not true. That is not the only way that you can draw down a portion of that $4 billion. You know, there is federal programs in place right now that would allow us to draw down and be a part of that program. First of all, you have got to compete for that money. If we were to go build a charter school today, there is no guarantees that we will get any of that $4 billion. So here's the truth about charter schools. First of all, there's no guarantees. None. We have got to compete against other school districts around the United States for that money. And that is just not what I believe that we need to be doing. So why aren't we pushing so hard for charter schools? First of all, studies show that only 85% of the charter schools are performing at the same level or below what we do in Alabama. So why are we pushing so hard for a system that only shows 15% have done a good job? So charter schools at best are a risky program or a risky experimental program. I want to make it clear again what my position is. My position is that I want every child, whether you live in Wilcox County or whether you live in Mount Brook, Alabama, that you get the same opportunity for an education as everyone in Alabama. You know, why would we, with a school system that is underfunded? I have been traveling the state of Alabama. We've got children that are begging for pencils, begging for paper, begging for soap. We've got school teachers that are having to do two jobs, teach and janitorial. Why would we take $1 from a public school system that is underfunded the way our school system is today? If it had not been for President Obama sending a stimulus package to Alabama, we would have half again as many teachers to lose their jobs that we already have. We are already 4,000 employees short than what we normally would be, and if it had not been for the stimulus money, we would be 8,000 employees short. So my question is, why are we pushing so hard to take funding out of a public education system that is underfunded today to create charter schools that is not a silver bullet? There have been charter schools in this country that have been closed down because they were not effective. What we need to do in Alabama is to make sure that we continue to work with innovative school programs, just as we have in Alabama, to work with magnet school programs and the current standards that we have in our public schools. Let me make it clear, we ought to be aggressive going after a part of that $4 billion that is laying on the table, and we should go after it. I want to use an example that Governor Riley used. He said that we ought to be going after charter schools because we are 1 in 10 states that don't have charter schools. Well, we are only 1 in 7 states that don't have a lottery. So if we're going to use that example, then why don't we pass a lottery for the children of Alabama that when they're in the 9th grade, that at least we give them hope for a further education. If we're talking about excelling our children in Alabama to where they can make a living, then why don't we educate them once they leave school? And I've laid that program on the table, and we ought to be doing that. Charter schools are not the answer. We have got to focus on new revenue. I don't know if anybody has made it clear. Our school system is broke. Our school system are not being funded adequately. School boards all across Alabama are going into banks as we talk today and borrowing money to keep the doors open across this state. Teachers are having to do 2 jobs. Teachers are having to reach in their own pockets to pay for supplies. Students are having to get out and ask for donations so that we can keep the doors open at our schools across Alabama. So folks, I've laid a plan on the table. I've told the people the truth about our school system in Alabama. And charter schools is not the silver bullet. I will not take a dollar from an underfunded education system to build a charter school when it would take a lottery program, when it would take a lottery to see if your child would be able to get into that school. So I'm standing before you today because I'm standing up for the children of Alabama. I'm standing up today to tell the people of Alabama that you don't have to build a charter school to be eligible for part of the $4 billion that President Obama has put out there for education. We have programs in Alabama that can be eligible for that $4 billion, and we ought to be aggressive in going and get that money so that we can help all schools in Alabama. So I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for your patience, and I'll be glad to take any questions that you have right now.
As you acknowledge, charter schools is only part of the overall component for competing for race to the top funds. But talk a little bit about what you just talked about in terms of the state being underfunded for education. Those very programs that the state's going to use to compete without charter schools are in jeopardy because of our current funding situation.
Absolutely. That's a very good question. You know, the next legislative session, we're going to try to figure out how to keep from laying off more teachers. You know, I think it's time that we really get serious and get our head out of the sand. You know, I've laid a program on the table to say that we need to tax gambling, that we need to control it, and we need a statewide gaming commission. There are millions of dollars that are being laid on the table every day that could go into our education system and help us move Alabama and to help our innovative schools. I've said that we ought to pass a lottery in Alabama. You know, they say that we're only one of 10 states that don't have the charter schools. We're only one of 7 states that don't have a lottery program. We're only one of 2 states that don't have a lottery east of Nevada. That's Mississippi and Alabama. And you see what Mississippi has. They've got Mississippi casinos that I've said time after time again. 4 million visits from Alabama to Mississippi. Millions of dollars going across that line, educating their children. Millions of dollars going to Georgia, going to Florida, and going to Tennessee. And we're standing here talking about charter schools when only 15% of them excel. Why are we pushing for something that has not been a success in other states? Why are we pushing for something so hard when our system in Alabama is underfunded already? We need to lift up all schools with innovative programs to make sure that all students in Alabama have an opportunity for a fair education. And I'm not willing to pick out a few little charter schools, take money out of the public education system to fund those programs. Got a question?
Speaking of the study that you're talking about, is that the Stanford study?
Stanford study.
Have you looked at any of the other studies that say some charter schools have shown some success, and particularly if you look at individual states?
They have been some charter schools that have shown some success. But I think that's probably in states that are not in an economical crisis that we're in Alabama. I mean, our education system is grossly underfunded today. We are losing teachers. We are having to borrow money to keep the doors open. How could anybody? Let me say this. If we want to invest in a charter school, then invest into my revenue programs that I've laid on the table